Mastering electronic dance music. Logic Pro.
Hey, welcome back to Mastering EDM with Logic Pro, and this is the 5th video in a series introducing mixing. And today I'm going to be covering distortion. Now, distortion is one of the things that can show up as an unwanted thing in your mix, and it's also something that you could intentionally add for a variety of reasons. If you don't know what distortion is, I'm going to pull up a distortion unit here, and you'll kind of hear what it sounds like. But I'll then go into why it's important to consider if it should be there or if it shouldn't be there. So we have this bass line here. Just gonna pull up distortion. And then you can really hear what distortion does there. Basically what it does is it drives the sound beyond a level it's supposed to be at, and what happens is artifacts show up in the sound and you get like this grittiness that you could actually see here. That it kind of represents, okay, when you have this sound and you take it up beyond specified volumes, then what happens is it loses some parts of the sound, other parts stay, and other parts just kind of come in randomly, and you get this gritty sort of sound that is reminiscent of the original, but doesn't really sound the same when you drive it up to really high levels. So that's what distortion is. And first I want to talk about why it shouldn't be there, because that's one of the biggest issues. One of the things that you'll run into when it comes to volume levels and compression is clipping. And I could show that here. I have this at -8, and I'm going to pull up a gain. And as I pull this up, you could hear distortion. And while typically you don't see that in a lot of finished tracks or hear that in a lot of finished tracks, you do get more subtle versions of it. Because what will happen is people don't have enough headroom on their tracks, which is space before it hits 0 dB, and then they start to do compression and limiting and EQing, other stuff like that. And what happens is the sound starts to get distorted, but you can't really tell. Now, sometimes that's okay. Other times, the reason you can't tell is because it's in the bass. And the bass, it's hard to tell distortion in the bass because, first of all, speakers that reproduce bass, it's hard to get a good set of speakers that reproduce the bass correctly and where you could really hear that. It's not that it's hard, it's just they're rather expensive compared to normal speakers. But anyway, and then the other thing is, what happens with distorted bass is it doesn't exactly sound nasty and gritty. It more of just sounds rough, so it's much harder to tell than if your mix is just clipping or something like that. But that is something you want to consider. One of the easy ways to get your tracks disqualified from someone that would potentially play your mix as a DJ is to have distortion on your final track, and where it's just clipping because you're either pushing the volume levels too high or you're doing too much compression. So that's I briefly touched on compression and how that could do that, and the reason is compression is it's based on changing volume levels. Oh, goodness. That's new. Okay. I updated Logic Pro, and it appears they completely changed the layout of the compressor. This looks very interesting. I kind of like this. Looks very retro. Anyway, well, with compression, you're changing the volume level, but sometimes you can let some of that through half of the circuitry with these various circuits, and that is even more cool how it changes color there. That is neat. Okay, so I might have to go over compression again just because they got a whole new layout for the compressor here. But anyway, when the sound goes through these, some of it is let to distort because of the changing volume level, and it can't really make up for the fact that like it won't pull the volume level down quite quick enough or something like that. Also, these circuit designs allow you to basically, actually, they emulate a certain circuit, and those circuits are known for adding harmonics and slight distortion to the sound when it's pushed through it at a high compression level. So compression as well as volume can create unwanted distortion, and you need to listen very closely for those to make sure you don't get it. If you have a very fast attack or very fast release or both, there's also a high chance that a compressor can give you distortion. So keep an eye out for that. That's why you don't want distortion. Now, on the other hand, distortion can be used as a tool. And I will show you that with this bass, because one thing that is done quite often is using distortion to warm up basses. And I'll show you how that's done. So right now I have the tone of this. I'm going to tweak it. If you have it all the way up, you can hear some really gritty sounds. So let me just play this back here. I hear that sounds really gritty. Now, I know that if I actually look at an EQ here, turn that off and look at an EQ, then go into the analyzer, there's nothing really right here. So that means I could actually go into the distortion and make it so it only distorts this region. And I'll show you what that sounds like here. If I pull up distortion, actually let me turn off the compressor here. So I just cut out that entire region, and I'm not getting that brightness there that we don't really want, because it kind of makes it sound too weird. But I could warm this up by adding distortion. So, well, that's a lot louder than... So it's one thing to keep in consideration is when you're doing comparisons, if you don't volume match, then you kind of don't really know what the difference is, because when you turn up the volume, things tend to sound better just because. So try to volume match when you're doing back and forth comparisons. But here, they're approximately volume matched now, so you can listen to the difference. This is off, and that's on. So it gives it a lot more body. And that's one of the things that you really need with bass lines. It needs to not be bright. It needs to have a lot of body so that it sits at the bottom of the mix well. That kick is like not coming through at all. Anyway, whatever. Probably because I slapped a compressor on it. Oh, that would be why. Yep. Okay, so let's try this again. Whatever. Anyway, so distortion can be used to warm things up, and that's one of the two main uses that I want to talk about here. And the second one is that distortion can be used to alter the sound of something completely. So this piano here, you gotta, just a regular piano. And if I slap distortion 2 on this one can do some pretty... There we go. So that, when I turn the tone up all the way there, you get this very different sound. And there's actually one other thing I could do that'll make it even more so. If I get an EQ this, and then layer another distortion on top of it, it'll sound even more different. I could do that here really quick. So, where's most of the body? Oh. Now I'll just go regular distortion. That hardly sounds like a piano anymore. It sounds like it's some sort of distorted synth almost. You could tell it was originally a piano. That's why I said initially, when you drive it up a lot, you get a sound that's reminiscent of the original, but it doesn't really sound like it is the original by any means. So keep that in mind as you're working with distortion. You can change the sound drastically, or you could just alter it slightly. And there's one other way you could use distortion that's actually worth covering here, and that is if you have something like a piano here, and it doesn't have a lot of high end. If I pull up the EQ again, it doesn't have a lot of high end, just because the nature of a piano. It's more mids. So if I add a little bit of distortion here, and if I do this right, I might be able to do this. Yeah, this is hard to do. Here we go. I'm gonna do a different type of distortion because this one really helps show you how you can make things. This is it's based on bit crushing and downsampling the audio, so you get a different sound. So if I pull this up all the way, it just sounds normal. And if I downsample it, it gets bright. Even more so. So I really like to use bit crushers because they add a really sharp brightness to it that you could do some pretty interesting stuff with. But that's a different type of distortion as opposed to these, where it doesn't entirely work off the basis of driving. You can drive the signal by using this, but the most characteristic sound of a bit crusher is the downsampling. So that's a slightly different type of distortion. Everything else here works on the premise of driving the volume level to some point, and then you have gain compensation typically that you could pull things up or down. So that's distortion in a nutshell. It's good and it's bad. It just depends whether or not you want it there. If you didn't put it there intentionally, and it sounds good, maybe you should work it so it's there intentionally. But otherwise, you want to make sure that you don't have distortion when you don't want it, because that could quickly disclude your track from being enjoyable, and people will just throw it out the window if they hear distortion on your master channel because you're compressing too much or something like that. So really make sure that you do not get unwanted distortion. At the same time, distortion is a very good tool for changing the characteristic of something, or making something sound warmer or brighter. So you should use distortion if you're working in EDM. There's very few cases where you wouldn't use a single distortion unit. I imagine chill out and ambient, you might not use too much distortion, but even a lot of those have a very distorted synth that's just drowned in reverb. So it's a tool that's very widely used, and sometimes you can't even tell it's being used because it's being used right. So keep that in mind as you're working, and try out the various things you could do by adding distortion to some of your synths. See if you could change the sound, or see if you could just make it sound like, make it mix a little better, make it cut through the mix, or make it have more body or something like that. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and everything like that. If you have any suggestions for videos, feel free to leave those in the comments here, or shoot me a message through YouTube, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can and answer any questions you might have. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next video.